Good morning and welcome to Mosaic. I'm Ron Swisher. It's always a privilege to host Mosaic on behalf of my co-host, Elizabeth Egdale. Last month, she interviewed me as I retired from the United Methodist Church after 47 years. But she mentioned also that I'm not going to retire from Mosaic, not yet. So it's always a great privilege to have the opportunity to host Mosaic. And so I look forward to the months ahead and hopefully into the new year. One of the joys and privileges of hosting Mosaic is the guests that I have. Thanks to people like Troy Belton of Good Media, who contacted our host, I should say our guest, who's been here before. Didn't know if we'd get a chance to get him back. He's an actor, he's an activist, he is a comedian, he is a writer. He's done so much throughout the Bay Area and other parts of the country. And so we're blessed to have Donald Lacey back with us. Welcome, Donald.
Hey, Reverend Swisher, always good to see you.
Great to have you again.
And congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you very much. I look forward to the years ahead.
Yes, sir.
Of relaxing.
Yes, sir.
As I said to you earlier, there's probably very few people who don't know you because of all that you've done and all that you've accomplished. But there's always a few here at 5:30 in the morning might not know of your background. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what you've done?
Yes, thank you. I'm from Oakland, California. Graduate of San Francisco State University.
Right.
I'm actually have 2 degrees in theater arts and black studies, and this year is the 50th anniversary, by the way, of the School of Ethnic Studies, of which
I didn't know that.
I got one of my degrees.
That's great.
And been in show business most of my professional career, writing, acting, directing, doing stand-up. And then, of course, when my daughter was unfortunately murdered on October 20th, 1997, I put all of that on hold and started the Love Life Foundation to honor her memory and work with at-risk youth to violence and teaching them what I know, which is media, entertainment, with the only caveat that they put out a life-affirming, positive message as opposed to, you know, the usual disrespect, murder, and mayhem that is so promulgated in the mainstream media.
That's one of the reasons we have you back. And our theme, of course, learning to forgive. And we'll talk more about that, but we're here because of all that you've done in that area, particularly with your daughter. That is so moving. One of the questions before we get to that in the next segment is that Elizabeth asked me, Egdale, in my retirement, what was the compass or my anchor in my life that kind of guided me? And I mentioned something we talked about last time, almost 2 years ago. The Lord is my light and my salvation.
Yes, sir.
Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalms 27. I would have added, as I look back at that interview, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Because I also have a hunger for learning and growing and for wisdom and knowledge. What are some of your anchors?
Well, you know, it's divine providence that you mentioned the 27th Psalm, because the 27th and 91st Psalms are Psalms that I do every day when I wake up in the morning and when I go to bed at night. Mm-hmm. I would say my parents and my grandparents.
Excellent.
You know, part of the problem with a lot of these youngsters, due to the whole crack cocaine and epidemic, which was, of course, so brilliantly documented by the late, great Gary Webb, it removed a lot of the men out of the equation. And a lot of these young, you know, the saying...
Talking about the 80s, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly. And that old saying that sounds trite, but it's definitely true. To be a man, you have to see a man. And unfortunately, a lot of our young black men don't have the positive black male role models. I had my father, my grandfathers, I had my uncles, and then my father had a lot of friends who were surrogate uncles, if you will, to give me the right instruction, to make me accountable for my actions, to be respectful to my elders. You know, it amazes me when I see some kids call their parents by the first name. Oh, that was the death penalty. If you called an adult Mary or Elizabeth instead of Mrs. Butler, or oh man.
I was blessed too.
Yes, so you know about that.
Yeah, that's right.
And then not only that, I used to say my mother would give out discipline coupons in the neighborhood. If I, hey girl, you go ahead, put hands on him, send him off.
Right.
Because we, you know, it was more, particularly in Oakland, it was a very nurturing environment. We had family and we had, surrogate. I had a lot of what we used to call mud deers, who I still have relationships with this day. So, yeah, that's part of what we need to bring back to our community.
We're going to talk more about that and what you've done with your daughter and the foundation and all of that. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Please join us in this next segment with Donald Lacey as we talk more about learning to forgive, which is our major theme. Thank you. Welcome back to Mosaic. I'm Ron Swisher, and we are blessed. I say blessed because we have Donald Lacey with us and all the great gifts he brings. Tell us more about your daughter. I saw the Redemption Project, I believe, with Van Jones on CNN last month, and it was so moving. Tell us a little bit about what that was like.
There's an ancient African proverb that says, before children are born, they pick their parents, and I really believe that my daughter chose me for that particular moment. She was an incredible young lady. I delivered her on the freeway while driving.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, in fact, on her birth certificate it says place of birth 580 freeway.
Wow.
Attending physician Donald Lacey, and I put BD, baby's daddy. So, but she was just she was an incredible spirit, a very positive spirit. In fact, a few months before she was murdered, a young man in the neighborhood was killed, and she came to me and said she wanted me to help her write a play about stopping violence. And I was moved by her willingness to take the grief and the pain she was feeling to do something positive. So quite naturally, when she was murdered, that became my overall motivation, was to make something lasting come out of something so horrible. And Love Life is the official motto of Oakland. Whenever you come into Oakland,
Love Life.
Love Life sign.
How long has that been there now?
That's April. It was voted in April 5th, 2016, and the signs went up 2018.
Yes.
So yeah. So
tell us her name again.
Loishe, which is Igbo and Nigerian, and means lo, coming from the Igbo word lolo, to love, and Ishe, the Nigerian word meaning life. So I put the two together, Love Life, because I figured she was so eager for life that she was born before we got her mom to the hospital. And she was a conflict resolution mediator. She was all about, she was a true unifier.
Even at 16? Even
at 16. In fact, I'll never forget, her teacher told me one time, Mr. Lacey, she called me and said, your daughter is amazing. There was a serious beef between some black kids and some Latino kids. And I have this great picture of her where she's standing in the middle and she's bringing the two guys who were beefing together. So that was her spirit. So quite naturally, I feel like everything that has happened, including me forgiving that young man, is due to her spirit and her loving nature.
I'm grieved every time I hear the story. I'm grieved every time I hear someone murdered. The violence, the viciousness, the vengeance of people. What was that like to lose your daughter at that time?
Man, the night it happened, October 20th, 1997, my initial reaction was for revenge. And I was getting a lot of, we didn't have cell phones back then, we had pagers, and I was getting texts. And people were already informing me the night of that they had a good idea of the individuals involved. But the last person I talked to was my dear grandmother, Mother Franken, who lived to be a couple months shy of 102, Church of God in Christ. And she told me what the devil meant for evil, God was going to turn to good. And right at that moment, I thought about what my daughter had taught me when she was grieving. So I put the word out. I didn't want any, vengeance.
Gangs did it, right?
Yes, it was
individual, but it was gangs.
The young man who picked her and her girlfriend up, who gave them a ride home from her job, was involved in some illicit activity in the neighborhood. But they all grew up together, and everybody knew everybody, including the young man who was the assailant. And one of the reasons that made it easier for me to forgive him was a few months after she was killed. He confessed, because he didn't know she was in the back seat of the vehicle that he recklessly shot in.
And he was 16 himself, wasn't he?
Yes, he was 16 at the time. So I always felt that he had a conscience. But it took me 20 years to get to that point, to look him in the eye like I'm looking at you and say those magic 3 words, I forgive you.
What did Van Jones, how did he come to you about that? Is because all the work you've done?
Well, it's really, again, divine providence, because I started the restorative justice process 10 years prior to it actually happening.
Okay.
And then there was different changes in administration in San Quentin who was involved in that program. And then this lady, Karina Montag, who you saw in the Sexual of the Black Woman, she became part of it probably 2 years prior to it happening through the Inside Prison Project. And the reason it took so long, because I had told her, and I didn't know Van Jones and CNN was gonna be involved. I told her I wasn't gonna meet him for the first time unless a camera came. And the reason was, I wanted to set an example of forgiveness. And then probably about a year before it happened, she said, CNN and Van Jones has this thing called the Redemption Project, and they're interested in doing your story when you go to visit. Christopher Smith is his name, the young man who was the assailant. So yeah, it took a little while longer, but you know, it was worth it, because again, part of the reason, in particular in the Black and brown communities, why there's so much violence, because there's retaliation.
Right.
People hold that grudge and they want to strike back.
Yes, yes.
You know, so
I was so glad I saw it. Troy Belton called me, texted me about, I think, a day or so before, and said, you got to check it out. And Donald Lacey is going to be there. You know, he's been our guest here. So I said, I checked it out, and I was moved deeply about that, and how you had to meet this man. Chris was his name.
Christopher Smith, yes.
Christopher Smith, and you talked to him, and he was in tears too, as you both cried about the loss and the terrible situation.
Yeah, in fact, and I left it in the car. I usually have the big picture of her that I take everywhere, and they didn't show it in the shot, but before he came in the room, I was holding it up. So when he walked in the room, that was the first thing he saw, and he broke down crying. It was genuine, you know.
It was.
Because he really, and even prior to me meeting him, he wrote a letter to me expressing his remorse for what had happened and how much he loved my daughter, and he was talking about how he remembered her at elementary school, this and that. So, yeah, you know, and then you know, he's out now, and I'm hoping he stays on the right path.
Amen, amen to that. We're going to talk more in the next segment about that and the whole nature of forgiveness.
Yes, sir.
And that's always powerful.
Yes, sir.
I hope you've been with us. We'll continue this in the next segment with Donald Lacey. All the greats have talked about forgiveness, from Jesus to Gandhi to King to Nelson Mandela to Maya Angelou. And they all say that if you don't forgive, you can't get past your past.
Yes, sir.
You're back in the past. Forgiveness allows for a future. But it's still not something easy to do. So I want to talk more to Donald about what that's like to forgive.
You know, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm reminded of how the seed was originally planted in me before my daughter was killed. In 1995, when I was working a lot, I used to go to Chip Murray's church, First AME.
Oh, yes.
And I will never forget this woman, and I don't know her name, but I can see her face. She had a testimony of her 14-year-old son who was murdered for his Nikes when that was shot in the head 3 times. And I will never forget this woman. I get emotional just thinking about her. And she stood up and she said, every month I go to the jail and have Bible study with the young man who killed my son. And I could not, at that moment, I remember, I could not conceive it. I remember I was crying, and I waited till everybody went up to her afterwards, and I was the last one. And I said, ma'am, I don't understand how you do that. She said, son, with God in faith, it supersedes any human understanding. And I remember I hugged her, and I've often wanted to, I don't even know the woman's name or how to connect with her and just tell her and who would have known 2 years later that I would suffer the same fate as she did. But I was so impressed and amazed, and that's where the seed, I think, was originally planted, because I never forgot that woman.
Jesus, of course, was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. Well, I often think they do know what they're doing. So how do you forgive persons who know what they're doing?
Well, you know, again, what in his particular case, because there were 4 people involved. There's one other assailant who I pray never gets out. Some people
That's true.
are just beyond redemption.
That's true. It's really
you know,
true.
so
Sometimes,
again, the fact that he had a conscience, because had he not confessed, he would have never did time for that. And he's been, you know, he's institutionalized. He went in at 16. He was arrested at 15 the first couple of times. So now he's a grown man, 21 years, almost 21 years later, trying to navigate his way through the world. So in his particular case, again, the fact that he demonstrated a conscience made it easier for me. But you know, you know this, that we're in a spiritual. This is a battle of spirits.
That's right.
So, you know, while you can forgive the person, you can't necessarily forgive the act. So that's the way I approached it. And I often thought of, as you quoted, Jesus saying on the cross, and almost one of his last words was, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." So, you know, I just had to pray a lot and just use my training and understanding the way I was taught by my parents and my grandfather to realize. And the other thing too, it was very liberating for me. I felt like I weighed 5 pounds when I walked out of that San Quentin prison that day, because you don't realize, and I've seen a lot of other parents like me who become bitter and hold on to that anger and that grudge.
Many of us who saw that and know of your struggle will say, well, I'll never forgive. Some take 20-something years. Some take 1 year. Some take a week, like in the church, was it in South Carolina or North Carolina? I can't remember right now, where the fellow came in and killed all the people, and they said, we forgive him. All of us said, how could you do that?
And I was one of those, and I was, because I remember it was a week after the act.
Yes,
and they were arraigning this kid in court. Dylan Roof was his name. And unequivocally, every one of them, family members of the victims, and I was, and that actually encouraged me when I saw that, because I went back and forth. Even as much as 3 months before the actual event, I started to back out, you know, so because it's just one of those things you wrestle with, you know.
You got to wrestle with.
Because this was my firstborn, my only daughter. You know, I could have had grandchildren by now. You know, no, she'd be 38 years old now.
One of your mentors, Wilson, August Wilson.
Yes.
He said that if you don't wrestle with your demons, the angels will never sing. And one of the wrestling you do is to learn to forgive, he said. It illuminates things.
Wow.
But it's easy to say that. It's hard to put it into action, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I've never knew that quote by him, but that is very, wow, yeah. Yes, you do have to wrestle, because, you know, we're bound by this flesh, and we're humans in the final. And, you know, quite naturally, too, part of the other pull was a lot of people, well, not a lot, but some people in the family were very objectionable to me doing this.
I'm sure.
Her mother, for one. And even after, I think she came to grips with it, but she still has her own feelings towards him that she has to reconcile within herself.
Well, one thing about forgiveness, everyone has to do it on their own pace.
That's right.
And level.
That's right.
And so when you have people say, well, you got to forgive. Well, you didn't go through what they've gone through. Have you been in their shoes?
Exactly. And you're so on point, because I think you mentioned it earlier. I've seen so many people, you know, that this thing that CNN posted on Facebook, it's gone viral. It's almost up to 6.5 million views, and there was thousands of comments, and I didn't read all of them, but there were several people who had their children murdered say, I will never forgive that so-and-so and this and that. And I just said, you know, I pray for you.
Pray for you.
That's all I can do.
That's right. That's right. That's one of the things that Nelson Mandela talked about when he came out of prison, that the two roads to health and wholeness is goodness and forgiveness.
Yes, sir.
But those two roads are hard to walk sometimes.
Man, you were quoting some of my favorites, and how amazing was he to have been
27
incarcerated
years.
and to come out and then to hire some of his jailers to
That's
work.
right. To be at the inauguration.
Yeah.
27 years.
Yeah.
And you do that?
I mean, he was just an incredible human being.
Right. We have one more segment. I don't want it to end. I know people are listening don't want it to end. So come back to be with us and Donald Lacey as we conclude our learning to forgive and how important that is for our lives. Learning to forgive is always a process. And so I'm going to ask Donald in these last few minutes, is there a way or formula that helps in that learning? Because we're all in the process and we all have to learn to forgive in our relationships, in society, in the community, in the world. Is there a set way, you think?
You know, I really don't think there is, other than what I would say is if you really want to free yourself, because forget the person who did you wrong, be it a friend or whatever, holding on to that, you're not hurting them at all. If you really want to improve yourself and raise your vibration level, then I would say become selfish about it. How can I make myself better?
Yes.
And maybe that will help you, look past whatever,
That's one of the things Maya Angelou says.
Right.
About you're taking the poison that you want them to take.
That's exactly
when you don't
right.
forgive.
That's exactly right.
And but it's still a hard process.
It is. And you don't necessarily have to forget, but
yes.
for your own self benefit and to improve your quality of life. Hey man, people always ask me, how are you doing, Mr. List? I say, every day I wake up is a good day. And I start there, and then anything else that happens, I'm just embracing every experience.
What was it you go to bed with or pray every day?
The 27th and the 91st Psalm.
91st.
Yes,
That's
sir.
right. And both of them are
He
very
that dwelleth
powerful.
in the secret place of the
Most High
shall abide
right
under
under
the shadow of the Almighty God.
That's a great one.
Yes, sir.
That is a great one.
In fact, a dear friend of mine gave me that in a gold frame for my 35th birthday.
How about that?
And it hangs on my wall in my
I
bedroom.
preached on that years ago, and I remember the title, The Secret.
Yes.
I just like that one, The Secret Place. Well, I know you've been an example to so many people throughout the city of Oakland and throughout not only the city of Oakland, but throughout our country for what you've done and the work you do. I pray for your career to continue to bloom, all that you bring to acting. And we haven't heard much of the comedy, but we know you're a superb comedian.
Thank you, sir.
And we know of all that you do as activism in this society. Continue that work.
Hey, God bless you.
Thank you,
Always a
Donald.
pleasure. And congratulations. 73, I can't believe it, man.
Thank you, Donald.
If I look half as good, God willing, I get there, I'm going to be doing all right.
Thank you, Donald. I appreciate that. I hope you have learned a lot to be with us this day with Donald Lacey. I'm Ron Swisher. I read recently that God has to forgive us or there'll be no one in heaven. So all of us need forgiveness at some point in our life, mistakes we make, errors we make. We fall short, and we all need help. Learn to forgive. God bless you all.